Talking on this program with two very interesting guests, the first of which is the professor of an MBA program in a West Coast university. His name is Michael Schuster, and welcome very much, Mike.
Thank you very much.
The United States has been, for so long, the dominant economy. Is there a real competitor emerging?
There is today. If you look at what China is doing, they're experiencing right now a 9.5% growth in their GDP. That is a growth rate the United States has never had before. And we look at China only 2 or 3 years ago, and they were a very poor nation. And yet today, with a 9.5%, with that type of growth, they're far out expanding what the United States economy is doing today. We are experiencing only about the 2.5. And it's a manufacturing base that China is going for. And the globalization of the economy with the lowering of costs that China can produce today, there is going to be great growth there. And if we're looking at 1.4 billion over there that can consume the products that China puts out, it becomes a very good power, a very good economic power. Europe, too, because they have combined and they have the euro and they have the currency there, so there's a great deal of strength that's coming from Europe. India, more on the service side. They're trying to expand and they're trying to serve the manufacturing base around the world. So between China, with a 9.5% growth in the GDP, India also has that light growth. There would have to be a certain amount of wealth that's going to be coming from those two.
But the world is very different today then, isn't it?
It's very different. Again, if you're looking at what is going on today with all of the exporting that's going on with China today, and you're looking at the power there, it won't take very many years before, in an economic standpoint, that China can rise up. Again, if you're looking at a 9.5% GDP that China is experiencing today versus the United States 2.5, and all the imbalance of imports that we have today, there was $150 billion worth of a negative imbalance between China and us.
So they're sticking dollars in their bank, and they're hoping that they're worth something. How has the United States benefited from being able to, as it were, invent the world's money?
Well, the United States was such a strong economy for so many years, and if you look at the United States and the abundance that we have enjoyed here, and again, only 2 or 3 years ago, if you look at the nations of India and China, it was more of a predominant, the people were poor. It's only been over the last 3 or 4 years where the free market has come into being there, and they're beginning to enjoy the growth of a middle class. Money, with the outpouring of our goods for so many years, that the world just had some great trust in what the dollars were. And so when you look at the asset base, and you look at the standard of living that America has enjoyed really ever since World War II, that the world always looked toward the global economy and the strength of the economy coming from what was back here. So if you look at the U.S. economy, the money supply most of the years would grow at the same rate that the increase in the GDP was. So with the growth rate and the standard of living, and with the GDP being at about 11.2 trillion in the United States, there isn't any other kind of a economy up until this point that ever could compare. So when the dollar was back with that type of an asset, the confidence that the world had in both of the products and the goods that came from the United States and with the dollar had great strength.
And now, if you take a look at the value of the Chinese and the Indian economies alone, they're about equal to America's, aren't they?
They are.
How does the United States actually create money? Explain that process.
The money is just supposed to be a medium of exchange. So what the United States does is it just prints out money so we don't have to go back and barter. And when they're printing out money, the key to not, to have an inflationary type trend is that as we have the GDP, which is the growth in our goods from each year, the money supply ought to grow at the same amount of rate that the GDP grows.
In other words, as the economy is bigger, there's more real stuff that the money represents, then you can print your money.
That's correct. If you overprint it, of course, at some point in time, you get to, money out there may not be backed by goods. So there can be an inflationary trend if we begin to print too much of the greenbacks.
Inventing money is something that is done by the federal government of the United States. Why does everybody in the world want it? Because really the dollars that are there for the American economy are also there in everybody else's banks, all these other countries. Why is that?
Because of the purchasing power of the dollar. Again, if you look around the world and you look at the beginning of the economic growth rates that the United States enjoyed since World War II on. They so outpaced everybody else. So at that point, what you were doing is that the dollar itself, because it was such a very strong medium of exchange, that no matter where you are in the world, the dollar has so much respect that it has the buying power. So the dollar can be buying goods anywhere. And because there was such a great economy that was backing up the green dollar that we had here, most of the economies that hadn't kept up with the economic pace that the United States had, their dollar was very weak because of the assets that backed it.
So America's had to actually increase the money supply, not only for what we have here, but for all these other economies that wanted to buy American stuff or just put stuff in the bank for their own asset value.
Yes.
And yet many of them bought all kinds of stuff from the United States, like American government treasuries, American government notes to pay them back, right?
Yes.
To the tune of trillions of dollars?
Yes.
And what happens if they don't value that anymore? Is that what we're going to talk about later?
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the American lust for the stuff money buys. It's so embedded in a culture now that it actually blinds people to the fact, and even government leaders, policymakers, to the fact that it can all end rather suddenly. But first, we do offer this booklet called Managing Your Finances. You know, we live in a very real world where there can be a sudden change in not only our own financial affairs if we have something happen to us, like a change in health or somebody dies, but we also can have a country that can have the rug pulled out from under it in economic terms, as we're going to be hearing later. Well, you need to have your financial house in order, and that's what this little booklet called Managing Your Finances will do. Watch an ad, go to tomorrowonline.org where you can get this and also see this program and other fascinating programs online, or call the 800 number that you'll see in the ad. And we'll be right back, and we're going to be talking about the blinding nature of money lust.